Hi, you are watching Tech Live London, and this next session features Jane Fletcher, experienced design principal at Kainos. For more than 7 years, Jane has been driving significant project work on large-scale accounts, including the NHS and DSTL, to name just two. Jane has a keen knowledge and background in human factors, user research, system design, business change, data, and AI ethics. Today, she's going to be talking about trust in AI. So, welcome to the show, Jane.
Scott, good morning. As I said, my name's Jane Fletcher. I'm a principal service designer here at Kainos, and I work closely with our data and AI practice. For those who don't know us, Kainos is a technology company working in several sectors to help our clients, be they government or health or private companies. We combine transformative technology with courageous ambition to reimagine how they operate and deliver change for good. So Kainos has a great pedigree of delivering digital services to UK government and commercial clients all over the world, with deep expertise and knowledge of leveraging open source machine learning frameworks and leading cloud AI services, including AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. Our specialist data and AI practice is leading industry best practice for our clients. So, for example, Kainos was recently delighted to be confirmed as an MOD's DSTL, that's the Defence Science and Technology Laboratories Agile Delivery Partner, to help them deliver cutting-edge AI within the Defence AI Centre. So I'm here to talk about the key themes identified in a recent report commissioned by Kainos and what we're doing as an organisation to address those themes. So what report is this? Well, we partnered with Tortoise Media and several leading AI specialists to build awareness of the risks of misuse of AI. Much like the impact of humans on our planet's climate, we feel that they need to be addressed. In the last few decades, the move towards environmental sustainability has seen professionalism, standardization, and mechanisms for disclosure, all to create confidence that the world economy can decarbonize. But we identified a strong correlation between this history of sustainability and ethical, trustworthy use of AI in industry. And we present an argument that trustworthy technology is responsible, understandable, and sustainable technology. Like the impacts on climate, the impacts on the misuse of AI must be addressed. The report is 40 pages long, but easy to read, and offers insights that everybody can understand and apply, from developers to designers, executives to employees, decision makers and decision takers. So how can you get the reports? I'll put the link up at the end of the report, at the end of this talk, if you'd like to have a read. But you can also use the QR code that's on the screen right now. So let's talk about why we commissioned the report. Trust is complex, it's messy to articulate, it's difficult to measure, especially during the design of advanced technological systems. So I'm a service designer, and the key part of my role is to understand the unintended outcomes and find ways to communicate those impacts of the systems that I work within, and I work with stakeholders to design mitigations for those outcomes. Artificial intelligence is currently used in a vast range of applications, from keeping spam emails out of our inboxes to sequencing the human genome, with much more in between. And many of the models and algorithms created are unseen and unfelt, but their impacts certainly are. Harms listed here, and these are probably the most well understood and the most well known, can emerge from racial, gender, or other socioeconomic biases already there, or emerging from the biases held within the data provided to the AI. However, it's important not to think that this is a problem inherent in artificial intelligence itself. Quite often, the harms emerge from many factors, including poor design, poor governance, and implementation. So some of the examples we mention in the reports include, some of the examples we mention in the report include 3 commercial applications of AI-driven facial recognition technology that were found to perpetuate racial and gender-based discrimination. For example, when Uber drivers were denied access to the platform after algorithmic decision-making systems wrongly removed them because the authentication software failed to recognize their faces. Italian car insurance companies were using opaque, socioeconomically discriminating algorithms to create quotes, and that led to significant price rises based solely on the location of your birth. And of course, deep fakes are attempting to influence political outcomes and undermine democracy. For example, in the US, a doctored video of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in which she appeared inebriated, picked up more than 2.5 million views on Facebook. So we've identified that trust is fundamental to a sustainable, safe relationship between humans and technology as we move into the future. And like the themes of sustainability, as I mentioned before, the future is bleak unless trust is actively built between people and the systems that they use. This is something working in the field of AI and ML we've come to recognise as a fundamental to ensure that we move forward together. The report proposes 3 hypotheses about the future of trust in artificial intelligence. Firstly, the need to achieve trust in your AI that is embraced by the whole organisation. It's not just having an ethicist within the company, it should be front and centre in the minds, tools and approaches the whole organisation uses. Responsibility is not just a role. Secondly, there must be a use of standards throughout the development build-out. Having that strategy of trust is not just what is produced, but how we produce it. And it's often been observed that the more complex and seemingly unexplainable, for those not literate in data science, the more accurate the AI can be. But trust is eroded due to a lack of comprehension for those who the AI is being used by or it's being impacted on. So let's briefly review the summary of the 7 learnings for organisations. These will allow you to take the experience gained from the adoption of ESG. For those unfamiliar, that's the shorthand term for either environmental, social and governance factors, to minimise the risks associated with the use of AI and maximise trust. In the last 20 years, sustainability as part of ESG has moved from being a less recognised aspect of business to perhaps the most dominant commercial narrative in history. Where before, chief sustainability officers were rare, now there's barely a large organisation on the planet that doesn't have one. Of course, the critical whole planet risks we face are much higher on society's list of challenges, but we believe there will be the same shift in focus as the critical trust element of AI becomes increasingly more prevalent. So let's focus on some of the learnings in more detail. As I mentioned before, sustainability factors have matured into a critical priority for business. Certainly, we see investors applying these non-financial factors as part of their analysis process to identify material risks and growth opportunities. For example, I would recommend you consider how your organisation's board level ESG policies have changed in the last 2 years. And in a similar vein, the example harms from the misuse of AI get more headlines, but measuring the societal impact from AI is a key growth area. Please consider that when evaluating your full suite of ESG factors. So the quote in the slide is pertinent. Governance to do with AI will certainly form part of your organisation's ability to deliver effectively, but this will need complex and careful thought on how to manage as we move from data privacy and security policies. So when considering the implementation of an ethicist into your organisation, it's important to consider what level of production AI you have adopted across your organisation so far. If you're early on the journey, then you're at the perfect time to recruit for this role. It's fundamental in any organisation planning to use AI. However, those with much more advanced programs of work need to consider how to apply trust and ethical considerations to work already completed, to minimise risks and identify mitigations that might need adopting. The titles you have might be different, or there might be another role in your organization, such as trust officer, responsible AI lead, trust and safety lead, machine learning trust engineer. But don't forget, you might have someone already in your organization that you can develop into this role. So let's have a look at what an ethicist does. So they provide research and expertise on data ethics and acts as a champion and change agent throughout the organization. They enable and empower others to implement data ethics best practice in their work. This could include providing data ethics training, advising on the data science teams, demonstrating how to apply ethical principles in practice through examples and case studies and driving best practices. They will need to communicate effectively to explain and raise awareness of ethical and trust issues, as well as listen, convene, advise, and mediate between various parts of the organization. They will create a space for people to ask questions, express concerns, discuss dilemmas, and identify trust issues. It is important to empower this role, and it's an important role that must have seniority and reach. And just as we saw with the adoption of sustainability champions, it'll take time for organizations to embrace that change and fully understand the critical nature of this role. Remember, an ethicist should not just be within your technical departments. Think of them as an ethical product owner with leads into your product, sales teams, and your marketing departments. So we talked about the criticality of the role an ethicist within an organization. However, trust and harms awareness cannot be the objective as a single person. Instead, they should be there to help with the practicalities of ensuring your AI-driven products and services are produced through an ethical lens. These practical measures can be put in place in any stage of your delivery. Think about integrating a harms workshop when considering the business problem. Look at your OKRs and KPIs through an ethical lens. If you want to increase your value proposition, what are the impacts to be considered? How do they fall into your wider organizational aims? Have you considered a set of mitigations in how you can apply the AI into your systems thinking through a whole service ecosystem developed by a service designer like me, not just the technical landscape? How can you make sure that you repeat the harms assessment throughout the whole project lifecycle, from initiation through your marketing comms planning and your business change projects? Do you keep your AI models and data sets at arm's length, or do you have a culture of openness? Allow your data sets to work, your data scientists to work alongside your user researchers and product and service designers. Do you encourage a culture of questioning and explore whole team impact assessments? In this talk, I cannot address the approach here with a single diagram. Organizations and teams are too varied and complex for that. However, I would encourage you to do some analysis about how your teams are constructed when working with AI. Do you encourage a flat hierarchy, open discourse? Do you remove the silos between the different types of teams? It's more imperative than ever when building an AI. So there are clear parallels to the adoption of sustainability roles. One person alone cannot make change. Just saying you're ethical and pointing to an ethicist does not mean that your products and services will be trustworthy. So there's a plethora of published ethical AI principles and frameworks in this ecosystem. Algorithm Watch, a non-profit research and advocacy institute, noted as many as 173 and counting as of 2020. However, as our report notes, the quality of the frameworks fluctuates heavily, with much virtue signaling. But only 10 had measures they found had practical enforcement mechanisms. The big question within the industry is how businesses and organizations can adopt them. How to practically embed ethics into artificial intelligence lifecycle is complex, even actioning some of the recommendations I've discussed previously. It's important to question how the community can develop an internationally recognized certification of best practices, especially if it's going to cultivate trust in what can often feel like an alphabet soup of principles and frameworks. However, there is good news. Standardization has taken place, and two key players are emerging in the field. So the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, that's the IEEE, is developing the certification in AI ethics mark. So that's their credit score against a set of ethical criteria to safeguard algorithmic trust. To receive the mark, an organization will need to go through a rigorous process with an IEEE assessor who makes the initial assessment of the organization, the technology and the area of operation for particular use cases. So while at piloting stage, this seems to be a positive step to fit the needs of many sectors. Secondly, the expert working group, now that's SC42, and that's created from a partnership between the ISO and the IEC, has been working hard to make headway on a standard that will offer a blueprint to facilitate an AI-ready culture. However, organizations cannot afford to wait, so what can we do in the meantime? For now, look at the framework offerings currently in the marketplace. Here at Kainos, our preferred method is the Alethea framework developed by Rolls-Royce. From our analysis, it covers many of the areas our clients focus on. However, we have drawn on examples and approaches by Google, IBM, Microsoft, and we also use government frameworks to drive our work. We work carefully to meet the needs of a project and a client, but it is critical that you become aware of the benefits and drawbacks when applying on a single framework. So another consideration to take is that there's likely a wave of legislation and regulation coming. For example, the recent European AI Act, which asks for harmonized rules regarding the implementation of AI. The proposed law offers a 4-tiered risk-based approach to regulation. So if an application is at the lower end of the risk spectrum, then a lighter level of self-assessment, compliance and legal enforcement is required. While higher risk systems will be subject to heavier, externally audited compliance requirements. There's certainly going to be some costs involved in ensuring compliance, and so you must think early about how to reduce the impact of those costs. So you need to make a strategic decision to be ethically sensitive and culturally aware right now. By encouraging diversity right within your technical product and delivery teams, you can allow them to naturally detect biases while equipping them with the skills and tools of every context that they work on. I touched on earlier that it has often been observed that the more complex and seemingly unexplainable an algorithm is for those not literate in data science, the more accurate the AI can be. But trust is eroded due to a lack of comprehension about how the AI came to those recommendations and decisions. If the end user, consumer, or those interacting with the AI at some point don't understand how the decision was formed, then they won't trust it. There have been many attempts to help AI explain complex model behavior to other practitioners. Google have their explainable AI to provide human interpretable explanations of machine learning models. And IBM have developed an AI Explainability 360 kit. But these methods are not something that can improve perception of trust to the end user. In fact, on some occasions, providing explanations can cause data scientists as relative experts to overtrust the machine learning models. So we need to go beyond technical explanations to ensure that public trust in the system is reliable in the systems that we're building. Different stakeholders, from data scientists to those ultimately impacted by the system. These stakeholders have different goals, different expertise, and therefore different needs and need different explanations. So some explanations could include impact explanations, when we build in mechanisms for making sure that impacted stakeholders will be privy to explanations of how ethics have been done and what decisions have been made, and the thinking done to understand the impact on people. Data explanations, where we are clear about the provenance of the data set and how we remove bias from the sources of our data. Fairness explanations, where we'll be able to demonstrate across the design, development and deployment lifecycle, the project team has sufficiently considered potential pitfalls of bias, and there have been a deliberate and transparent approach to defining what fairness criteria are being incorporated into the system, and responsibility explanations, where we are transparent about who, at any given point across the life cycle, owns and is involved in the decision making. So these explanations can be presented in a variety of different ways, and our report goes into many details on the various methods. The thing to take away from this talk is that explainability does not equate to trust, unless you've considered all the people who need to understand the way you explain it, the risks inherent in the thing and the context of the explanation. It's vital that we also ensure that we have balanced explainability with compliance, that we can demonstrate that we have consistently audited our work through the entire development of the model, and that we can demonstrate we've done so in a transparent way. It's 2022, and it's time for organisations to step up and really get to grips with trust and the ethical implications of AI. Whether you consider yourselves to be mature in data science area, and we did find that maturity varies not just across various companies and organisations, but also within them, efforts to use artificial intelligence in one area of the business might be more advanced or effective than in others. But if your business or organisation are large or small, mature or immature, digitised or digitising, you can all investigate trustworthiness. As I said before, hire an ethicist who can help guide you on this journey, but don't make them the person who has the ultimate responsibility at senior business, not just technology level. It's also important to make this a whole team problem and a foundation for successful delivery. Using tools like Harm's Workshop and ethical canvases are part of your ways of working and will bring awareness to your technical teams and data scientists and support and change the culture needed to bring trust to the fore. I talked about the Alethea framework earlier today. However, there are several frameworks out you might find more suitable for your needs. We often work with governments who have their own AI ethical frameworks and governments that we need to be mindful of. I would suggest you take time to explore the one that you feel closest meets your organisational needs.
Okay, thank you so much, Jane. It's a really good way to start our day off here at Tech Live London. Thank you so much for the presentation. You did mention there's a couple of QR codes as well. So I'm sure our viewers, both virtually and in the room here in London today, would have been snapping on those. And remember that the sessions will be able to be viewed on demand as well. So if you did miss those QR codes, don't worry, because you can dive back in and catch those. And we'll also try and make sure we get those onto the event app as well, Brella. But before then, Jane, just had a couple of questions for you. What would you say, what's the entry point to understand AI?
That's an interesting question. There's no easy answer. It's about developing awareness, judgment, and sensitivity to factors. There's more that we could be teaching about how AI infiltrates us. Customers aren't always aware about how AI is used. There needs to be a mechanism in place to support the learning.
Okay. And let's, if companies are watching this now and they're wondering about how best to implement this, how can companies be pragmatic before clear guidelines exist?
Well, as I spoke in the presentation, there are a lot of developments of principles, but it's going to take time to make them more specific, practical guidelines. Standards and certifications can support better use of technologies and organizations, but I think we're in a turning point now for the professionalism of tech ethics.
Okay, are you willing to put a timeline on this, Jane? Can I tie you down to how many years we're talking about here?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, as I said, great way to start off the sessions here today. Thank you so much, Jane from Kainos. Okay, and stay tuned. We'll be right back in a few minutes with the next session today.